The headlines about electric cars have been gloomy lately.
The company is shifting its EV strategy.
They say car makers are reversing course on building EVs.
It could be a tough year for selling EVs.
And customers are losing interest in buying them.
But many experts insist the future is still electric. Here's why.
5 years ago, barely anyone buying a new car in Canada chose an EV. Fast forward to today, and zero-emission vehicles make up nearly 13% of the market, a record high. While it's not a straight line up, it's clear that sales are still growing, just not as quickly as expected.
So where are we at in the transition to EVs?
Yeah, I'd say we've definitely passed the early adopter phase.
JD9 tracks the auto sector for market research company JD Power. He says most early adopters, who rushed to buy new technologies, have bought into EVs.
The next step, though, is to convince a much wider swath of Canadians that electrification is right for them.
That mainstream buyer is less wealthy and more practical. In a JD Power survey, many Canadians said EVs are still too expensive. They also worry about how far they can travel and how difficult it will be to charge the battery.
If I make a mistake buying an EV or it doesn't suit my lifestyle, I mean, that's a $65,000 problem.
That could explain why sales of plug-in hybrids are revving up. These models run on both battery power and gasoline, a good compromise for customers concerned about range and charging, and less risky than going all electric. It's a trend that has car makers shifting gears.
Back in 2021, car makers were investing billions of dollars in EVs and pledging that they would stop building gas-powered cars. But customers aren't going fully electric as quickly as predicted. And with most manufacturers still losing money on EVs, it's no surprise that they're making some adjustments.
This year, GM said it will build fewer EVs. Ford plans to invest more in hybrids. Volvo is delaying plans to go all electric by 2030. Despite all that, car makers insist they're still committed to the cause.
We'll be ready to go fully electric this decade, but if the market, infrastructure and customer acceptance is not quite there, we can allow that to take a few more years.
For those customers hoping overseas car makers like China's BYD would bring cheaper EV models to North America, that may take longer too, after the federal government slapped 100% tariffs on Chinese-made EVs to give a jolt to domestic manufacturers.
We are building an EV industry here. We have all of the ingredients for Canada to succeed in this sector. I'm convinced we'll continue to see a growth in EV adoption, but we do have to address some of those barriers to demand.
In Canada, our target is that 100% of all light-duty cars and passenger truck sales be zero emission by 2035.
The federal government is using mandates to speed up the transition, pushing car makers to build EVs so there's more supply. The policy says by 2026, 20% of all new cars sold should be zero emission. By 2030, that target jumps to 60% and 100% by 2035.
Ottawa is also trying to sweeten the deal for buyers. All Canadians can get up to $5,000 back if they choose a zero-emissions vehicle. And depending on where you live, you could get even more. Quebec is the most generous, offering an additional rebate of $7,000. So it's no surprise that EV adoption there is soaring. There are also incentives available in the Atlantic provinces, Manitoba, BC, and the Yukon.
You can drive much farther in an EV these days. Most have a range of 300 kilometers or more, and new charging infrastructure is being built every day. The biggest barrier to adoption seems to be the upfront cost, which often gives mainstream buyers sticker shock.
Take the example of a compact SUV. The Toyota RAV4, which runs on gas, costs about $36,000. Compare that to the electric Hyundai Ioniq 5, with a price tag of more than $57,000. A recent government report says to spark consumer demand and meet federal targets, Overall costs of EVs must drop more than 30%.
So apart from price, what do you think would make a big difference to persuading Canadians to switch to an EV?
I think it's important to note that 50% of Canadians have never even sat in an EV. A lot of Canadians today just don't know what they don't know about EVs. Between manufacturers, policymakers, lobby groups, that's going to be one of the big tasks in the next couple of years.
So while the road to electric vehicles has hit some speed bumps, car makers haven't abandoned them, and customers might just be waiting for them to get a little cheaper. For now, the future is still electric, though the journey will take a little longer.